Almost everyone misunderstands how this company makes money. Picture the most ordinary morning imaginable. James is standing in his kitchen, phone in hand, trying to check his bank balance before he leaves for work. The app spins. It doesn't load. He shrugs, figures it's just his phone, and opens a different app to check the weather. That one won't load either. He tries to order a coffee through a delivery app. Nothing. He picks up his phone to call a friend and complain, and notices his smart doorbell camera, the one that usually pings his phone every time the mail carrier walks up, has gone completely silent too. By the time James gets to his laptop, his social media feed is full of the exact same confusion. People posting screenshots of banking apps that won't open, gamers locked out of their favorite titles, a doorbell company confirming an outage, a rideshare app apologizing for delays, dozens of completely unrelated businesses in completely unrelated industries, all breaking at almost the exact same moment, on the exact same morning. And then James sees the headline that ties it all together. One single company was behind almost all of it. Not a bank, not a phone carrier, not a doorbell manufacturer. A company that most people only think of as the place where cardboard boxes come from. So today's business file opens with a question that doesn't make any obvious sense at first. How does an online shopping company have the power to break banking apps, doorbell cameras, food delivery, and video games, all at the same time, without selling a single one of those things itself? To answer that, you actually have to stop thinking about this company as a shopping company at all, because the shopping is, in a strange way, almost the least important part of the story. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to the beginning, because the real answer was built by accident, decades before anyone realized what it would become. The company most people know for delivery boxes on their porch started in 1994, in a garage in Bellevue, Washington, as an online bookstore. Its founder had a simple insight. The internet made it possible to offer a far bigger selection than any physical bookstore ever could, because you didn't need shelf space for every title. You just needed a warehouse and a website. Books were only ever the starting point. Within a few years, the company expanded into music, electronics, toys, and eventually almost anything a household might buy, growing so fast that the world's biggest bookstore quickly became too small a description for what it was turning into. In those early years, almost nobody, including plenty of experts on Wall Street, believed an online bookstore made any real sense as a long-term business. Shipping physical books to people's homes cost money. Warehouses cost money. And for years, the company barely turned a profit at all, choosing instead to pour nearly everything it made back into growing bigger, faster, and wider. More categories, more warehouses, more customers, even while skeptics openly wondered whether the whole thing would eventually collapse under its own size. But growing that fast created a problem that had nothing to do with what the company was selling, and everything to do with what it took to keep the website running. Every single day, engineers inside the company had to build and manage the computing systems that kept the site online. Servers to store data, systems to process orders, infrastructure to handle traffic that could spike wildly during a big sale or a holiday weekend, and then sit mostly idle the rest of the year. Managing all of that internally, just to keep the online store working, became one of the most expensive and complicated parts of the entire business. Here's the part almost nobody outside the company saw coming. The very same computing systems, built just to keep the bookstore turned everything store running, were, quietly, becoming something far more valuable than the store itself. Think about it the way you'd think about a bakery. Imagine a neighborhood bakery that builds an enormous, expensive, industrial-grade oven just so it can bake enough bread for its own morning rush. That oven sits mostly empty for the rest of the day. Now imagine the bakery realizes something. Other bakeries across town, and even bakeries in other cities, don't want to build their own giant ovens. They'd rather just rent oven space, by the hour, whenever they need it. So the original bakery starts renting out its oven to other businesses. At some point, you have to ask which part of that bakery is actually the real business anymore. The bread it sells at the counter, or the oven it rents out to everyone else. That is almost exactly what happened here, except the oven was computing power, and the business built around renting it out launched publicly in 2006, under a name most people have heard, but very few people could actually explain: Amazon Web Services, or AWS. Here's where the mystery gets more interesting instead of less. Because this is where most people, if you stopped them on the street and asked, would guess completely wrong. If you ask someone what makes Amazon its money, almost everyone says the same thing: shopping. Packages, prime deliveries, that giant warehouse business you can practically picture in your head, boxes moving down a conveyor belt. And here's the part that should genuinely surprise you. That mental picture is almost the opposite of where Amazon's actual profit comes from. Selling things online, the actual retail store, the packages, the shopping you and I do every week, is a brutally low-margin business. Anyone who's ever run a small retail shop knows this instinctively. You buy something, you sell it for a little more, and after rent, shipping, staff, and returns, there's not much left over. Amazon's retail operation has operated this way for years, often making razor-thin profits, sometimes barely breaking even, because keeping prices low enough to keep customers coming back eats almost everything else. So if the shopping side of the business barely turns a profit, where does all the money actually come from? That's the question James can't stop turning over. And the outage he just lived through, the one that had nothing to do with anyone buying anything, is about to become the biggest clue of all. If you're starting to see where this file is headed, that's exactly the reaction we're going for. Hit like on this video right now, so more curious minds find their way into today's business file. Let's look at the actual numbers, because this is where the mystery stops being a hunch and becomes something you can practically prove with a calculator. In its most recent full fiscal year, Amazon brought in roughly $717 billion in total revenue. Of that enormous number, the cloud computing division, AWS, the oven rental business, brought in only around $129 billion. That's a real number, but on its own it looks almost small next to everything else. It's roughly 18 out of every $100 the company brings in. Here's the clue that should stop you in your tracks. That same 18% sliver of the business generated well over half of the company's entire operating profit. Somewhere around 57 out of every $100 of profit the whole company made that year came from that one division alone. 18% of the revenue, more than half of the profit. Stop and sit with that for a second, because it doesn't add up the way you'd expect. Normally, whichever part of a business brings in the most money is also the part making the most profit. That's the assumption almost everyone carries around without ever questioning it. But here, the smallest slice of the pie, by revenue, is doing more than half the actual work of keeping the company profitable. Which raises the obvious next question. If shopping isn't where the real money is, who exactly is paying Amazon all that cloud computing money in the first place? And why does it even matter to someone who's never bought a single thing from a business account? And it's not the only clue hiding in plain sight either. There's a second business almost nobody thinks about when they picture this company. The small sponsored listings that show up at the top of a search result on the shopping site. The sponsored tag easy to scroll right past without a second thought. That advertising business has quietly grown into a multi-billion-dollar operation of its own. And like the cloud computing division, it runs at a far higher profit margin than shipping boxes ever could. Because there's no warehouse, no delivery truck, and no packaging involved at all. Just space on a screen that other companies are willing to pay for. Once you notice that clue sitting right next to the first one, the pattern becomes impossible to unsee. The parts of this company quietly making the most money are almost never the parts wearing the company's most famous face. That answer connects directly back to the morning James's phone went quiet. Streaming services people watch every night. Banking apps people check every morning. Ride-share apps, food delivery apps, dating apps, doorbell cameras, even some of the biggest social media platforms in the world. Huge numbers of them don't build their own giant industrial oven. They rent computing power from Amazon's cloud division instead, the same way a small bakery rents time in someone else's oven, rather than building its own. Netflix streams a huge portion of its shows using rented Amazon computing infrastructure. So do government agencies, hospitals, airlines, and thousands of companies you've genuinely never heard of, quietly running in the background of your daily life. Which means when that one Amazon data hub in Virginia stumbled on an otherwise ordinary Monday morning in October 2025, it didn't just inconvenience Amazon's own shoppers. It rippled outward into banking apps, doorbell cameras, food delivery, video games, ride shares, and dozens of household name platforms that had quietly built their entire operations on top of the exact same rented infrastructure, because so much of the modern internet is secretly leaning on the same oven. Take a second to actually appreciate what that means. A company most people picture as a delivery truck and a cardboard box is, underneath the surface, one of the load-bearing walls of the entire internet. If your brain just did a little double take, that's the moment this whole file has been building toward. Go ahead and drop a comment right now telling us the last app or website you personally noticed acting strange, because odds are good it was connected to this exact story without you ever realizing it. So here's the moment everything finally clicks into place, all at once. The packages on your porch, the free 2-day shipping, the endless product selection, that's not actually where Amazon makes most of its money, and it never really has been in recent years. That side of the business exists to keep customers coming back, to keep the company enormous and central to everyday life, almost like a loss-absorbing front door. The real engine sits somewhere almost nobody ever sees or thinks about. Warehouses full not of boxes but of humming servers, quietly renting out computing power to a huge portion of the modern internet, generating more than half the company's actual profit from less than a fifth of its revenue. The shopping is the story everyone sees. The cloud is the story almost nobody notices, until the day it breaks, and half the internet breaks with it. That's the real answer to the mystery from the very beginning of this file. How can a shopping company accidentally control huge portions of banking, gaming, and streaming all at once? Because underneath the shopping company, there was never really just a shopping company at all. There was a computing company that happened to start out selling books, and then quietly built the invisible infrastructure that an enormous share of the internet now depends on every single day. The business lesson underneath all of this is worth sitting with, because it applies far beyond one company. Sometimes the product everyone can see, the one with the recognizable logo, the one people line up for, the one that gets all the attention, isn't actually where a company's real value comes from. Sometimes the true engine of a business is something built almost by accident, quietly, in the background, to solve an internal problem nobody outside the company ever thinks about. It doesn't get the spotlight. It doesn't show up in advertisements. But it can end up mattering more than the thing the company is actually famous for. The lesson isn't just about Amazon. It's a reminder to look past whatever a business appears to be selling and ask what's actually happening underneath, because that's usually where the real story lives. James looks at the box sitting on his porch differently now. It used to just look like a box. Now, every time he sees that familiar smile-shaped arrow, he thinks about something completely invisible, a warehouse somewhere, not full of packages, but full of servers, quietly running a huge portion of the internet in the background, unnoticed, unless it stops. Amazon was never really just a shopping company. It was, and still is, one of the quiet engines the entire internet runs on. File closed. If this file changed the way you'll think about that cardboard box on your porch, that's exactly what this channel exists to do. Like this video, if any part of this genuinely surprised you, share it with someone who still thinks Amazon is just an online store, and leave a comment telling us whether you'd ever guessed the real engine behind the business before today. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new business file. And while you're down there, tell us this. Can you think of another everyday company that might be quietly running a completely different business underneath the one you always assumed it was? Because next time, we're opening a file on a business almost everyone walks past without a second thought, until you learn the one small detail that changes what you think it's really selling. See you in the next file.